Okay, whenever you're ready, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, everyone, welcome to this meeting of the East Sussex Council's Audit and Governance Committee. I'll do a little bit more about welcomes a bit later on under my announcements item on the agenda. But if you move to the agenda, and the first item there on is apologies for absence. Council's Audit and Governance Committee.
Right, so we've got apologies sent from Councillor Huggins, and we've got a substitute, Councillor Curtis, taking his place this evening. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda it relates to the minutes of the last meeting of the committee, which was held on the 19th of May 2020. Is the committee happy to confirm that the minutes of that meeting held on the 19th of May are a correct record?
Chairman, if I may.
Yes, I do.
I'm happy to propose that with one very loyally and pedantic amendment on page 7. I don't think I count as plural councillors. That's all. So I'm happy to propose the minutes with that very minor amendment.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And I'm happy to second Councillor Warboot's proposal.
Councillor Alexander, Councillor Curtis, thank you very much indeed for that. Are we all in favour? Are we happy to vote in favour of that? Yeah, we just should by a show of hands. Yeah. Thank you. So that's the meeting. The minutes of that meeting are approved. Thank you. Under Chairman's announcements, which is the next item on the agenda, I'd like to welcome just a couple of welcomes, new members of the committee. We have 3 new members now of the committee: Councillor Fernando, Councillor Ward Booth, and Councillor Huggins. Now, unfortunately, Councillor Huggins can't be here, and I think Councillor Curtis is subbing for him. But also like to welcome Councillor Officer Will Troop to his first meeting of the committee. He's a new officer at the East Sussex Council, so welcome, Will. Apart from that, I don't have any other announcements, and so that moves us on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, fine. If anything comes to mind, do let us know, and we can make a note of it at the appropriate time. So that brings us on to item 5, which is the presentation on cybersecurity. Ruth, I think you're going to lead with this, aren't you?
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruth Luscombe. I'm the AD for Digital and Transformation at Stevenage. Obviously, we have our shared IT service, so I'm here to update on behalf of the shared service. If you can just move us on to the next slide, please. So just by way of introduction to this, I believe there was an internal audit of cybersecurity within the financial year 2018-19, which identified a number of risks and management actions. So obviously cybersecurity is something we take really seriously, and so keen to work through these risks. And I think it's fair to say, well, some progress has been made. You know, and I can update on that throughout the course of this item. I think we've still got a number of areas outstanding which we need to address. So what I'll do is I'll take you through. There are 5 key actions, and I'll take you through where we are against each of those. So if we can just move on to the next slide, please. So this is a summary of the audit areas which were covered in the initial report. So there's an area around network security, so unauthorised devices attempting to connect to the network. So how do we manage that risk? Ensuring we've got appropriate firewalls in place and management procedures around those. Making sure that we have sufficient training on information and cybersecurity for staff. And appropriate incident management procedures around cybersecurity, as well as monitoring of our network activity and network performance. So if we move on to the next slide. So the first item there, but also covers the 5th recommendation as well, was really around our IT network and how we make sure that we have got good visibility of all of the devices on the network. And we monitor activity around that. So in terms of where we are on that, we've implemented something called Microsoft Intune, which enables us to have remote management of all of our mobile devices. We're in the process of testing that, and we've got 91 devices have been through that process, and we aim to complete that by the end of Q3 of this year. There's another action which goes hand in hand with that, which is about making sure that we have network access control mechanisms, which is enables us to monitor things that are connecting to the network and make sure that we haven't got any issues there. So we're looking at the procurement of that at the moment, which will go hand in hand with some of the network improvement works we've got around switches. So we're expecting that to complete this financial year. So we move to the next slide. So the second action was around firewalls, which are designed to, it's a bit like your virus protection. It helps unwanted visitors into your network. So we have got two things again here that go hand in hand. So replacement of the firewalls with a procurement plan to complete by the end of October, and alongside that, make sure we've got change control processes in place. So it means that where we've got projects happening, if there is a impact on the firewall, we need to make sure that that's you've documented the rules around who how access to the network can be granted. So that change control process, we have got something in place, but I think there's just a bit more work to do to document that and finalise that, and we want that to be in place by the end of Q3. So on this, thank you. We can just move to the next slide. So the third point was really around training for staff and making sure that we have adequate awareness of cybersecurity issues and information training as well. We've got a meta compliance product which enables us to do things like simulate a phishing attack, and that then enables us to see who might be more susceptible to a phishing scam among our staff, and be able to roll out specific guidance and policies. So there's a sort of a suite of training materials that come as part of that product, and now what we're looking at is the resourcing in order to be able to move that on and actually deliver the training within both organisations. As part of that, and alongside that, we're looking at the creation of our shared information governance team, which would bring together responsibility for training for the information side of this, around GDPR and cybersecurity as well. So where that's at is we just need to make sure that we've got both organisations signed up to that we've got the right model for that team, and that we've got adequate resources in place and budget for that. So if we move on to the last item, so the last area here is around our incident management procedures, moved. Thank you. So the last area is around our incident management procedures and protocols. So I think we've got this partially completed, and we're looking at developing a more detailed cyber incident response plan. We're looking to procure that. I think it's been delayed slightly because of the response to the pandemic, but we're picking that up again now. And looking for that to be in place by the end of Q3. So that's really the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you very much indeed, Ruth, for that. That was very informative. Thank you. Are there any questions? How are we going to signify if you've got questions? Are we going to use the blue hand? Sorry, maybe I should have made this clear at the beginning of the meeting. Or are we going to just put our hands up on screen? Should we use the blue hands for questions?
think blue hands is probably the best way forward.
Okay, so any questions then? Use your blue hands. Now is your time. I mean, maybe I could start if there aren't any obvious, any immediate ones. Ruth, in terms of the internal audit items, in the internal audit report, there's one item outstanding and it relates to network access control. Forgive me if you covered that in your presentation. Can you just give us a reminder about how that's going?
Yeah, so I covered it, but very briefly. So there is so the network access control is really about it goes hand in hand with the in-tuning of the devices. We are sorry, I'm just referring to my. It is outstanding, and we do need to continue to progress it. We are looking at a procurement process for that alongside some of our other network upgrade work, and we're expecting to complete that by the end of this year.
Sure, because one of the sort of reasons for delay was cited as being financial and resource restrictions. It was maybe historic. Are those restrictions, have those been overcome now, in terms of there's nothing stopping you apart from just doing it over a period, as it were?
As far as I'm aware, so yeah, I'm pretty confident we've got the budget we need for that, and we're able to progress it. It's more about capacity and timing, so that we do it have a sensible procurement route alongside the rest of our improvement programme.
Sure. On the subject of funding, when later in the report, we'll be looking at the capital expenditure, the report for this meeting, looking at the capital expenditure outturn. Under shared business and technology services, there's quite a lot of that budget is being carried over to the next financial year. I mean, I don't know if are you aware of sort of projects that you just haven't had a chance to do them? Maybe the funding's there, but you just need to sort of have the staff capacity to get them done. Is that?
Yeah, so
that much of an issue for you?
So apologies, I've been in post since May. So in terms of historic issues, I'm not completely over all the detail, but my understanding is the IT strategy was signed off in December by both organisations. We've got a comprehensive programme of work that we are progressing. There's been efforts to get the right team in place, and be part of accompanying the IT strategy. We've invested more in developing that team, and I think that team is largely now in place. I think I'm aware that we have carried over funding from last year, and I think that is reflects just the complexity of the programme and the need to make sure we're planning it out right. And I think we've suffered a little bit of a further delay as a result of the COVID pandemic, but the work is now progressing at pace, and we're hoping that the bulk of that core improvement programme will be delivered within this financial year.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for Ruth on this matter? I can't see that there are.
Chairman?
Yeah.
My little blue hand up. Just to ask whether you foresee any greater risks to cybersecurity with the majority of the workforce working from home. And as a second follow-up question, are there sort of additional measures for people who use their own devices to log on, such as dual factor authentication? And with devices that the council issues, do they have physical measures, like you can't use your USB ports for memory sticks, like my work laptops and things have? Thank you.
Thanks, good questions, and I'll try my best to answer them as a non-technical person. Yeah, absolutely. I think there are increased risks as a result of people working from home. A lot of the things we already have in place, like the virtual desktop, help to mitigate that risk to some extent. But you know, I think what we have seen and not unique to us is more people willing to, you know, wanting to exploit vulnerabilities, and so there's probably more threats out there, you know, more generally rather than, you know, specific to us. I think what it probably does is underline the importance of the program that we have got to improve the security and the network that we have got. In terms of the multi-factor authentication, yeah, we are looking at that, and I think that there's already been some work done on that already. I think in terms of people using their own personal devices, obviously there's a limit to what you can get access to without being within the hosted desktop, and so that provides some assurance. I think some of the challenges are more around you know, people being able to access the things that they need from those devices, and our ability to support them as an IT service. So we have, apologies if you can hear some background noise. We are looking across both organisations at what the impact of the pandemic has been on both ways of working, and kind of the response in terms of the hardware that we have, because I think it's obviously a change we didn't anticipate, and it may have accelerated some of our thinking around what staff need and members need in order to be able to work effectively. So yeah, it's a very good question. I'm happy to provide a bit more detail on that as a follow-up.
Thank you.
So thanks, Robert. Thank you. So I think that concludes all the questions we have on this matter as far as I can see. So in which case, Ruth, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for your presentation.
Sorry, Chairman, there's a couple of hands waving. Councillor Palmer and Bob Palmer wants to speak, and also Helen Stanton, I think.
Can we use blue hands, I think, for questions? Or
Their hands are up.
Oh, I can't. Not on my. I can't see them on my. Oh, fair enough. Okay. Is that on my? Oh, here we go. Okay. I don't know who was first.
I think Bob.
Okay, Bob, you go first. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, sorry, I had tried to use the blue hand.
Yeah, sorry,
I just wanted to avoid any confusion or frustration for members later on. So I was going to respectfully suggest that we possibly change the order of the agenda, because within the annual governance statement, we do pick up on the IT issues again. So I wouldn't want Ruth and Helen to leave us now, and then when we get onto the annual governance statement later, for there to be further questions to cover off in terms of IT. So if members are happy with that suggestion, Chairman, I would suggest moving forward the annual governance statement to be the next item on the agenda, to make sure that we've got all the answers on those IT points.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea. Okay, thank you, Bob. Thank you. Okay, Helen, I think you had the point you wanted to raise.
Yes, I did. I was just going to really get a bit more around the IT. Obviously, Ruth is very new, and Ruth and I have been liaising, you know, sort of on a very regular basis. But going back to Councillor Ward-Booth's questions around the devices, as Ruth has said, having the hosted desktop makes it incredibly safe, both for our staff and for you know, other people trying to get in. We have had a couple of cyber attacks over the last 6 months or so. They've both been thwarted, so you know, nobody has actually got into our network, which is really good. And we do have to conform every year to government standards, and as part of that, we have penetration testing, where we have people who try to hack in. We pay them to try and hack into our systems to see how they do. And as a result of that, various things are flagged up, and then we work really hard to ensure that any gaps or holes are closed. So, you know, I just wanted to assure members that that is all in place. And whilst there are still some way to go to make sure that it's absolutely perfect, we have put in change controls across the network. We are doing the in-tune devices. So, you know, I want members to be reassured that there is no imminent danger from where we are at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, then in which case, members, I think we've noted that presentation, which was very, very informative, and we're going to move on with your agreement to the item, which was item 12 on the agenda, which begins on page 263, the annual governance statement. Bob, are you going to talk to this initially?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll introduce the annual governance statement. As you say, it starts on page 263. It's something that we present every year. We are required to do an annual governance statement each year, and it goes with the statement of accounts, but needs to be presented separately from the statement of accounts. What we have here tonight is the first draft of the annual governance statement, and we're asking members to review and comment on it. Page 263 onwards sets out the items that we are complying with here in terms of the various frameworks set up by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy and the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives and Senior Managers in terms of displaying good governance and complying with those requirements. Just moving down into the document itself, which starts at page 269 and is headed up Appendix A. The first couple of pages set out more background and show the structure of the good governance framework that we have at the authority, and sets out each of the principles, the 7 principles within the Sit for Solace framework, and how we actually comply with each of those principles. More of the things that we actually want to draw out in terms of changes this year and information that's immediately relevant to members and about the system of governance. Each year, our colleagues in the Shared Internal Audit Service are required to give an opinion on the council systems. This year, the opinion for financial systems is satisfactory, and the system for non-financial systems is also satisfactory. And that is an improvement on last year, because last year the non-financial systems had a limited assurance opinion given on them. Sorry, I should have said that's all on page 275. And within the penultimate paragraph on page 275, just a quick comparison in findings between the 2 years. So during 2018-19, the previous financial year, there were 6 audits that only had a rating of limited assurance, and with them there were associated 21 high priority recommendations. This year, and we'll get on to Simon's annual report later on the agenda, but the annual report this year shows that there's only been 1 audit rated as limited assurance and 1 high priority recommendation associated with that. So that's quite an improvement. Whilst internal audit don't look at exactly the same audits each year, I think it is indicative of improvements in the overall corporate structure and controls that we've seen the number of limited assurance audits fall from 6 down to 1. So what we then go on to look at is setting out the key issues and problems that were identified last year and how we've moved on and dealt with those. And in particular, there's the IT Shared Service Improvement Plan, cybersecurity and incident management, which are the IT related ones that I wanted to make sure members had the the opportunity to pick up any further questions with Ruth and with Helen. The final point in terms of last year's areas that needed addressing was on the section 106 spend arrangements, and those all the recommendations on the section 106 and handling those monies have all been addressed and dealt with now. In terms of the issues identified for this year, the issues we want to give priority to. The first one, again, consistent with the theme of IT, is making sure that all those high priority recommendations are more promptly addressed. The second issue is one that I'm sure members will be familiar with. The Council's policy or policies on the regulation of Investigatory Powers Act was somewhat out of date. And we did have an investigation and a visit from the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office that highlighted a number of areas in need of improvement. James Ellis, our new monitoring officer, has got to grips with that very quickly and got us up to date there. Those suite of new policies were reviewed by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee last month, and they were adopted by the Executive a couple of weeks ago. So whilst there was a problem on RIPA and that had been left for a number of years, that's now up to date and been dealt with. The one limited assurance audit in the current financial year, sorry, in the 1920 financial year, was associated with information governance, and that is highlighted for bullet points in the bottom of 278 for us to deal with. And we are currently looking at ways of expanding the resource in that area to deal with those points. In summary, under the conclusion, we do highlight the two particular things that we want to make sure happen better going forward. And firstly, promptly addressing the issues identified by internal audit as requiring improvement. As the committee has highlighted, there have been one or two recommendations that haven't been implemented quite as quickly as we would like to see. The second point, constructing a governance calendar to assist with the monitoring and updating of key governance documents. There's something James Ellis has started work on, and we're very keen to try and help him with that. We want to make sure that if we have got any documents that are out of date, like the RIPA policies were, then we're aware of those and bring those up to date as soon as possible. And also having that governance calendar, once it's constructed, will let us better monitor and keep an eye on all of those policies and make sure they are regularly reviewed and kept up to date. That's all I'd like to say, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Bob, for that. That's a good introduction, a good explanation of the paper. Councillor Booth, you have a question, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just in relation to the section on information governance on page 278. I think it's a bit alarming that 2 years since GDPR came into effect back in 2018, we don't seem to have the necessary retention schedule and disposal and destruction procedures, particularly concerning in light of Principle E of GDPR. And I just wondered whether there is a more concrete time frame for rectifying these areas, because it seems a bit non-committal in there and could be quite a fundamental GDPR issue.
Helen, you could respond to that.
Yeah, would you like me to respond to that, Chair?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So I'm at the point of I've drafted a report, Councillor Ward-Booth, which is currently with our finance and legal colleagues for their comment. So we have progressed it quite a long way. I'm working on this again with Ruth as part of looking at that. So some of the things that happened were actually, we did find when we thought we didn't have a retention statement or schedule, but we actually have found that now, and we have forwarded that on to our audit colleagues. So quite a few of the items that were listed as missing have actually been resolved now. So going forward, we're now working on that. And I believe that James Ellis, our head of legal, has forwarded those on to our audit colleagues for the final draft going forward. So just really want to again reassure members that things are happening with that, and the report will be going to leadership team in the next couple of weeks for them to give a steer on how they want to proceed. Following that, it will then come to executive for a decision on how we proceed. Once that decision is taken, then Ruth will be also taking a similar report through to SLT at Stevenage in order for the proposal to be agreed.
Thank you. I mean, I don't know what members would think, but I wonder whether this committee ought to be kept up to date with how you're progressing with the items that relate to this. Do you think you could just, you mentioned, I think you're addressing a number of the points that Councillor Ward-Booth made, but I wonder whether we should just be kept up to date to make sure that all these items have been addressed fully.
Yep, happy to do so.
Thank you. Will that come, how will we do that? Would that come, say, maybe to come to the next meeting, or
we
would
can update at the next meeting if you would like to, Chair.
Yes,
That's
yes. Members, do you agree, would you agree with that? You'd be happy with that? Yeah, nods around the table. Good, thank you.
Simon
Okay,
Martin had his hand up as well, Chair.
And Councillor Stowe as well.
Councillor Stowe, I could see Councillor Stowe. Councillor Stowe, if I can take you first, Councillor Stowe.
He's on mute. You're on mute, Councillor Stowe.
Right.
You've gone back on. There we go.
That's it. Yep. Right. Sorry, my machine's playing up. What are they going to say about the being this mentions it here, the 106 money, and we were requesting a report for the September meeting on what was happening, following on from the one we had last year in September. Can that be arranged?
Yes, that's my area as well, Councillor Stowe. Thank you, keeping me busy for September.
Thanks for that.
Simon, were you wanted to say something?
Yes, please, Chair.
Thank you.
It was just to remind members any high priority audit recommendations would feature in one of the appendices in my quarterly progress report. So you will get to see what the status is of those recommendations for the information governance audit.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I've said a couple of minor comments. That there's a number of references to performance, audit and governance within this statement. So does that just need to be, we just need to amend that?
That the report, Chairman, covers the governance structure that was in place for 1920, and during 1920 it was the performance audit and governance committee.
Okay.
So that'll be changed for next year's.
I see. I understand. Thank you. Also, I think we probably dealt with this, but under IT, we talked about the replacement of the firewalls, which was scheduled for April 2020. I think, Ruth, you probably dealt with that already, but I just want to make sure that there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
No, thanks.
You covered it in your presentation.
Yeah, that's fine. Covered, thanks.
Okay, thank you. And then there was...
Chairman?
Yeah.
Councillor Alder wishes to speak, please.
Oh, Councillor Alder. Councillor Alder, yep. Please go ahead, Councillor Alder.
Thank you, Chairman. It concerns the anti-fraud and anti-corruption strategy. Are you satisfied that we have got this well under control, bearing in mind some of the fraud that's been going on with the recent granting of monies to different businesses?
Well, we've got a report from the anti-fraud area later in the agenda. I don't know whether, Nick, do you want to cover that now?
Good evening, Chair. I think the strategy itself is something that officers are working on at the moment. So the strategy itself is the framework for how the authority deals with fraud, so around prevention and then investigation. So the strategy itself is something slightly different to response to incidents of fraud, and I do mention that in my report. There's a verbal update on the work that we're doing around grants and the issues that have been raised there. So if you're happy to leave it, Chair, I can pick up later.
Thank you. Okay, we'll cover that later if that's okay with you, Councillor Alder.
Yeah, get myself back in.
We'll cover that under
I just come back to say that I mean, this looks a very self-congratulatory paragraph, and I just want to know whether we are as rigorous in explaining that, because this is the annual governance report, and I think we need to make it slightly stronger in that we are an organisation that is committed to identifying and weeding out fraud and corruption. I just think it's just a little bit, you know, we're really good at everything. It's the wording, really.
Okay.
Chair, do you want me to come back on that at all?
Yes. Well, if you think if you can do now, yeah, it might be a good point actually.
Obviously, I can't comment on the AGS because that's Bob's report. But what I would say is the council does a really good job around fraud prevention and its activity to investigate fraud where it happens. And I think officers do buy into that. As I mentioned, there is a new strategy which is being developed at the moment. Bob might be able to provide more an update. I don't want to chuck him under the bus, but James Ellis has been working on that as well. James is producing a number of anti-fraud and anti-corruption documents, which will then be shared with staff, with members, with the public, and then will form part of an e-learning package for staff and members to access as well. So I think we're getting there. I think we do a lot at the moment within the council, and these strategies, when they come out, will really give a much clearer picture of what the authority is doing. I think it does a good job, but fraud happens. That's the reality of life. Unfortunately, we will be a victim of fraud attempts, and we will be a victim of fraud. There's very little we can do to stop it actually happening. What we want to do is try and prevent, mitigate, manage the risk as much as possible. I don't know if that helps, Chairman.
Councillor Alder, is that something does that help you in your comments?
Yes, it's just that I would like to make it clear that we do have a strategy and we are rigorous in the implementation of it, and perhaps some slightly stronger language in that paragraph would be more helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Bob, will you give that some thought? Because this is the first draft, isn't it?
It is, Chairman. I'm happy to look at the wording on the fraud paragraph and toughen it up a bit. No problem at all with that.
Okay, thank you. Under so the version I've got doesn't have a page number, but on the 3rd page it talks about members and officers receive training in code of conduct and behaviour issues. And then it goes on to say that the standards committee and the monitoring officer keep codes of conduct up to date and investigate any suspected breaches. Are we happy that that kind of reflects reality? I mean, the standards committee is kind of an ad hoc thing, doesn't it? Which kind of is formed for particular purposes, doesn't it? And I'm not sure that it's the standards committee that keeps the code of conduct up to date. Maybe, I don't know if you would agree with that or not.
I think it's James Ellis's responsibility as head of legal to keep the code of conduct up to date. And as you say, if there are standards committee requirements, then the standards committee is called together to meet when the monitoring officer is called to investigate potentially councillor misbehaviour.
Yeah. So again, would you just have a look at that, Bob, and see if you're happy with that or whether it needs amending? And then in the paragraph below, it talks about all officers and members signing up to the council's anti-fraud, bribery and corruption policy. In addition, PAGO as it was, receives an annual report setting out the arrangements in place and how these have been applied in practice during the year. I just can't recall this committee looking at that specifically, unless I'm misremembering.
Well, the arrangements in place during the year and how they've been applied in practice around the fraud side of things is picked up within Nick's reports.
Do we? I mean, I'm talking about the policy, and I'm just wondering, do we actually look at the policy? And do we receive an annual report setting out the arrangements in place on how these have been applied in practice? Maybe it's covered under Nick's section, but I just don't remember seeing anything specific along those lines.
Chairman, the part of the plan, the annual plan that we put in place for East Herts included a review of policies and also training and delivery of that training to officers and members. We did provide an overview of fraud and the council's fraud arrangements to PAGO previously. We provided a training prior to one of the PAGO meetings. Around the policy itself, as I mentioned already, the policy is going through a significant rewrite. It's looking at bribery, corruption, there's inclusion of whistleblowing or changes to whistleblowing, as well as anti-money laundering as well. So it's a major rewrite of the policy, and probably if Bob, I and James agreed to take that forward, we could probably bring it back to this committee to have a look at the final version of that framework of documents.
Okay,
with Bob's agreement, obviously. That's
sure.
Yeah, very happy to do that.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So I don't know if there are any other questions. I don't think there are. So are we? I mean, I guess at this point we're just noting this first draft. We've made a couple of. I mean, Councillor Alder made some comments which you're going to take away, Bob, aren't you? And you're also going to look at the anti-bribery area of things. Will this come back to? Will this statement come back to this committee in September?
Yes, hopefully our colleagues at Ernst & Young will have finished the audit and have it signed off by then. So we would hope to bring back the audited accounts and the final version of the AGS to the meeting in September.
Will we see a track change version at that meeting, so we can just see any amendments that you've made compared to the version we're looking at tonight?
Certainly, Chairman. I'm happy to present it however members want it. Yeah.
Would that be helpful, members? If the next version we see will be track change, just so we can easily pick up any amendments that have been made compared to that in that version compared to this one. That'd be okay. Yep, great stuff. Okay, thank you. So I think we're just noting this for the moment, and we look forward to seeing a revised version in September. Thank you very much indeed. So Ruth, I think you've done your bit.
Thank you.
So you're very welcome to stay if you'd like to, or you're very welcome to leave. Thank you very much indeed for your participation. Thank you. Bye-bye now. Thank you. Okay, so that's the annual government statement done. So then we go back to the agenda and we're looking at external audit fees, which was old item 6, new item 7 on the agenda. Begins on page 19 of the pack.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll speak to that.
Thank you.
As set out, sorry for the noise in the background there, Chairman. Yes, as set out within the report, public sector audit appointments are the body in charge of awarding audit contracts, and as part of that work, they do set the annual scale fee. The scale fee for the next audit has been left unchanged at £40,295. I'm sure members will be aware from previous reports that have been presented by the external auditor that they feel there is additional work that is now necessary, and that scale fee no longer adequately reflects the work necessary in order to conclude the audit. I have attached to my covering report a letter from the PSAA to myself and yourself, Chairman, and that sets out more background and more information on the fee setting process. Also, we have as Appendix B the arguments set out by Ernst & Young, and I presume Suresh would like to speak to that to justify the increase in the proposed fee that they are asking for. As set out in paragraph 2.3, I understand that from colleagues across Hertfordshire that the increase proposed on our fee is by no means unusual, and that other clients of Ernst & Young across Hertfordshire are having similar increases proposed to them. Paragraph 2.4, I set out the process that the external auditor is required to follow in asking for an increase in the scale fee. The process of submitting a request to PSAA, who will then review any application, examine it, audit it, if you like, Chairman, and then they will come to a determination on its validity, and they may either agree the request entirely, agree the request but reduce it, or possibly reject the request. My suggestion to members is that as PSAA are the responsible body for setting the audit fees and do have that wider experience and understanding of the entire audit market, we should not agree any increase in fees ourselves, but should actually leave it for the PSAA to determine. And I think Suresh will probably want to speak on behalf of Ernst & Young.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Sorry,
thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think as Bob alluded to, this agenda item is really a culmination of the issues that I'm sure you've heard me talk about probably for the last over a year, actually, in terms of the sustainability of the public sector audit market, and particularly the downward pressure on fees that has been in place for the last 2 or 3 years. So the Appendix B, as Bob alluded to, is kind of our rationale for why we believe quite strongly that those scale fees need to increase quite significantly, given the extent of work that we now need to do. I should say we have continuing to have these discussions with PSA at national level. And as they have suggested themselves, we have discussed it in quite a little detail with Bob and his colleagues across the country, not just in Hertfordshire. So we've been quite clear on what our view is on those scale fees, and we are in dialogue with PSAA about their determination nationally. I'll leave it there, Chair, from my perspective, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Alder, do you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Well, 2 questions actually. One on the PSA. Do they have? I noticed that they can agree the request, they can reduce it, or they can reject it entirely. Do they actually also recommend a fee as well? That's one question. And the second question relates to risk, where it says there is a risk the audit quality could be compromised if the external auditor is unable to obtain a sufficient fee forming the audit. I think that sort of says, if you don't pay us a bit more money, we won't do a good job. And I feel that there must be standards that you would have to adhere to in your audit process. And I'm just interested to hear what you would say in response to that. Thank you.
Who's Suresh or Bob would like to come back on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to take both of those.
Yeah, sure.
Chair.
Thank you.
So in terms of PSA, well, I mean, in essence, the scale fee that they've already set is their view at the moment on what the fee should be to deliver a code compliant, a National Audit Office code compliant audit fee for you. So their deliberations will be based on the level of detail we provide about the additional work that we recognise needs to be done deliver that code work. But essentially, the scale fee that they've set is what they feel at the moment is a fair fee to deliver your audit. In terms of audit quality, I mean, that essentially is at the crux of this. In our view, in order to deliver a fully quality audit in line with the NAO code, that is the fee that we consider to be appropriate to deliver that. But we are not saying that if we don't get that fee, we won't deliver you a quality audit, because obviously, as you say, we have international auditing standards. We have the Financial Reporting Council, who then reviews our compliance against those standards. So if we deliver you an audit opinion, it will be to those quality standards. What we're saying to PSAA and yourselves is that those quality standards have increased significantly over the last 3 years, which warrant additional work, which warrant additional fee.
Thank you. Councillor Alder, I think, are you happy that your points have been answered? I think I certainly believe they have been, but...
Well, I suppose the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, so we say. If it's, yeah. And if the job is being done for a particular fee now, and we feel confident that the audit is thorough and efficient, why would we pay more? I recognise that there are perhaps some more elements now to the audit process, but I'll wait to see what transpires when the PSAA have looked at it.
Yeah, I mean, I can see Councillor Corbyn, Councillor Stowe would like to ask a question, but as I mentioned to Bob earlier, I mean, in the private sector this year in particular, I've seen a lot of audit firms looking to increase their fees by quite considerable margins in some cases, because of some of the reasons that Suresh, you put in your letter, in terms of the increased regulatory scrutiny of the auditors and requirements that you need to follow, and you know, as a result of this, maybe you need to recruit more people to cover these additional things you need to do, and also I think certainly the kind of the governing body are also encouraging audit firms to increase their fees to demonstrate that they're getting an appropriate fee for the work they're doing. And so I'm seeing this a lot in my day job, you know, the fact that audit firms are increasing their fees. But I do hear what Bob has said earlier, and I think this is what members are echoing, that in that really, you know, I think the PSAA are the ultimate arbiter on this, and I think we'd have to defer to their judgment in terms of where the fee ends up. But anyway, I think Councillor Corb, I think you were next in terms of questions.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So I had a couple of questions for Suresh, maybe a couple of remarks, but I think kind of my overall gut feeling is that at a time when the council is really stretched for finances, and in particular that we're having to cut money for services which are key to the community. I'm thinking in particular about the cut we implemented this time last year to the Citizens Advice service by 10,000, which has possibly a very detrimental effect on our residents' access to those services, in particular during COVID when it's so useful. I think it would be very difficult to justify then authorising an additional £20,000, just like that, without really having good justifications or kind of good reasoning behind it. So I think we need to be very careful to make sure that we do have a strong case to do so, and I would agree with your suggestion that having the external body of the PSAA to do so would make sense. So I wanted to make that point to begin with. I mean, this is quite a large increase in fees, 70%. This is not just year-on-year inflation or anything else. And I do buy the argument that audits are perhaps becoming more complex, but some of the arguments that are made in this letter from Ernst & Young, and perhaps Suresh can comment on these, I feel like not all of them really apply to us either. So for example, there's on page 28 of the report, for there's this example of social housing where there's a difference in comparing the value of properties, and this authority doesn't have any social housing, so I don't really see where the additional complexity is coming from our point of view in that case. I know that we have Millstream property, but if I'm correct, and please correct me if I'm wrong, then that's audited by a different organization. So this shouldn't really be adding additional complexity. And the last argument in the report on page 31 is about investment in technology. And okay, it's already stated that we are as an authority already embracing these simplifying, this technology which should make the job simpler, and that's great. But reading this paragraph, it kind of feels like local councils are being punished for the lack of investment from Ernst & Young and others in the industry in these systems sooner. And I don't really know if it's appropriate for that cost to be passed on to the taxpayer. So yeah, those are my kind of general points. And my last question is that, well, perhaps to Suresh, but perhaps also to Bob, is, are other external auditors that are not Ernst & Young also proposing these quite large 70-odd% increase in their scale fees? Thank you.
Okay, Chair, I think I noted down 4 specific questions.
Yeah.
Councillor Corp can correct me if I'm wrong. So in terms of some of the detail in terms of our rationale, your reference to social housing is right. Yeah, that doesn't apply to East Hearts. That was just giving you examples of the additional complexity around valuations of property and social housing in particular, but you are right, that doesn't apply directly to East Hearts. Millstream, you're right, that is audited by another auditor, but obviously it's part of your group consolidation, so it is a consideration in terms of our audit and how you account for that. The reference to IT is about the fact that our kind of bid for doing this work was based on local government being able to service our audit using technology to the fullest effect, and that isn't the case everywhere. And there is an element of efficiency that we drive through the use of IT effectively. To be fair, that's less of an issue in terms of the cost of the audit compared to the regularity increases and the complexity of the account, but it is a factor that we have considered. And anecdote, well, I know for definite that all the other firms are seeking additional fees, but anecdotally, our fee increase proposals are at the higher end, and that reflects the fact that we are the only Big 4 firm carrying out this work. All the other firms who carry out this work are of the small or mid-tier firms, and inherently our costs are a lot higher than those firms.
May I jump back in, Chair?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
I mean, thanks for giving those qualifications. I mean, I think maybe you can see where I'm coming from here, that a lot of the arguments in this letter either kind of tangentially apply to us or don't really apply to us, and therefore I find it quite difficult to, especially if some of them apply for more councils than more to some councils than us, then you see what I mean about the 70% increase, which is really a quite large increase, being quite hard to square that circle. And in particular, okay, and also your comment about being one of the large, Big 4 accountancy firms, perhaps that's why you're on the higher end of the scale. But I don't know, my impression was that, if you have a larger organization, then perhaps you're able to find efficiencies elsewhere. So, okay, they're more comments than questions really, but I think this is why I think it really is a bit hard to swallow, and I think we'd have a hard time sending it to our residents, and why I think it's essential that an outside pair of eyes is making this decision and not us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob, did you have anything you wanted to say at this point?
Yeah, if I could just assist,
yeah,
Chairman, on the point of other firms in Hertfordshire. It is true that both the county and most of the districts are audited by Ernst & Young. However, Decorum are audited by Grant Thornton, and Grant Thornton aren't proposing any increase in the scale fee, but they have asked for £2,500 to cover the increased challenge and depth of work. Decorum's scale fee is £56,480, so that additional £2,500 equates to 4.4%. And I should just explain that Decorum's scale fee is higher than ours because Decorum still have a housing revenue account. But so the only other example I'm aware of another firm within Hertfordshire, they're seeking a much lower rate of increase.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, Suresh, I think, are you happy? You don't need to come back on anything else, do you? You're right now for the moment?
Oh, that's fine, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, in which case, Councillor Stowe, I think you were next.
Yes, whilst when you read the documents, and my understanding is there is more work to be done, and I agree with the others that 67% is massive, and I think if we actually put 67,000 in our accounts rather than 40,000, I mean, I think the questions will be surprising from our public. So I think it is only proper that the PSAA, decide this for us. It's almost a question of we're sort of not wishing to take responsibility for the increase, but I think it is rather large, and I think that concerns me a lot.
Sure, thank you. Councillor Wall-Booth, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to echo the points that have already been made by other members. I get the rationale for an increase, but 67% seems to be a little on the high side, particularly given the level of service that we've enjoyed for the previous audit and the difficulties we encountered there with Ernst & Young. So I'd like to propose that we accept the recommendation on page 19 and let the PSAA determine the appropriate scale fee. Thank you.
That's all. Thank you. I think that's a proposal for the recommendation. I think we've debated this point for quite some time now. So do I have a seconder?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, Councillor Alder, Councillor seconding, Councillor Wall-Booth the proposed, Councillor Alder second. All those in favour? I think that's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much indeed, members. I think we can move on. Suresh, thank you very much indeed for your input on that item. I think you and your colleagues from Ernst & Young, are you staying for any more? You're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to.
Myself and Richmond have to drop off, but Nazir Mohammed is going to stay on, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Well, nice to see you again. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Good evening.
Good evening to you. Okay, that brings us on to the annual assurance statement for the internal audit report. And that's, Simon, I think that's your item, I believe, beginning on page 33.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank
Chair.
you. Thank you.
Yes, you're quite right, starting on page 33 of your pack. This, by definition, is something that we do every year. There are some dependencies around it with Bob's annual governance statement report, so I won't repeat what the areas that Bob has referred to. The report itself details the overall opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's control environment, and it summarises the internal audit work that helped inform the opinion within the report. It also shows the outcomes of a self-assessment against the public sector internal audit standards, and it also includes reference to the shared internal audit services performance during the course of the year in respect of delivering the Council's internal audit plan. Lastly, there is a updated version of the 2020-21 audit charter, which I can explain in due course. I have a number of key messages for members of the committee, the first of which starts on page 38. This diagram in paragraph 2.12, that's just to reiterate what Bob was saying earlier about our overall annual opinion on both financial and non-financial systems.
And this appeared in the annual governance statement, didn't it? This diagram, didn't it? This was in the.
It did, yes.
Yeah.
So it was satisfactory in both cases. What that means in practice is that the Council's internal control framework is largely working well, and there were some audit findings relating to the arrangements subject to our review. Moving on to page 39, the tables at paragraph 3.2 summarises the various outcomes of the internal audit work in 2019-20. The first table there shows that we've completed 29 audits, and it shows what the various assurance levels were. across those pieces of work. The table underneath also shows the number of recommendations that we made, which was 83 in 2019-20. Again, you can see the priority levels and how those 83 recommendations were split over the roles. On page 41 of the report, there is a large table which sets out what the performance indicators for the shared internal audit service were in 2019-20. I'm pleased to say that the actual outcomes for the year we actually met or exceeded the targets that were set for us. So ultimately the council had the vast majority of its internal audit plan successfully delivered. On page 42, there's a brief explanation of something called the Audit Charter. The Charter is kind of a technical document which sets out the permanent arrangements for internal audit coverage within councils and the key governance roles and responsibilities that internal audit have and how they link with the council's overall governance framework. This charter is reviewed annually. Some of my colleagues reviewed it back in April. There weren't any fundamental changes, just a few small cosmetic pieces. It's a document which tends to stand the test of time. It only gets changed if there are amendments to legislation. The actual charter itself is in Appendix D of the report and on page 49. I won't take you through it, but fundamentally there isn't any change from previous years. Taking members back to the recommendation, if I may, there's one in particular I just wanted to draw a member's attention to, which is the last one there. And there's a small piece of theatre with this report of members needing to seek management assurance, Bob in particular, that the scope and resources of internal audit were not subject to appropriate limitations in 2019-20. And there's a need for members to seek that assurance and that to be formally documented in the minutes. That's essentially my report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. Any members, are there any questions on the report? And Councillor Court, you can go first.
Thank you. This is just a really hopefully trivial question, but maybe on page 36 in item 2.6, you say there are 2 areas of agreed non-conformance, and I must admit that I was a little bit confused by this terminology. Maybe you could, well, if you wouldn't mind, it'd be helpful if you could explain what is meant by agreed non-conformance. Thank you.
Yes, there are 2 levels of non-conformance. There's a level which means that you're not actually complying with the standard. That doesn't apply in this case. And in some cases, there can be local arrangements or deviations, as it's explained here, which are permissible. It's just that it's a variation on the wording as explicitly defined. So I suppose you would describe it as a technical deviation rather than anything material in terms of compliance.
But it would be nothing that would leave us vulnerable to a challenge if something went wrong or anything like that.
No, not at all.
Thank you.
Thank you. On paragraph 2.4, you mentioned the head of assurance. Who is the head of assurance?
It's Chris Wood. He is employed by Hertfordshire County Council, but as a part of the shared internal audit service, East Herts. along with the other partners who subscribe to the shared internal audit service, do benefit from input from Chris. He was formerly an auditor. He worked his way up through SIAS, became head of the service, and was very recently, in April in fact, appointed to the head of assurance role at Hertfordshire County Council.
Okay, thank you. A bit further down the page on 2.7, you talk about an external quality assessment of SIAS, which is undertaken every 5 years, and that this has been moved, the deadline for this has been moved out a bit in common with a lot of other things due to COVID, I guess. Can we seek assurance from you that it won't go past May 2021 in terms of the deadline for undertaking this piece of work? And who would carry it out typically? Who carries this sort of review out?
To answer your first question, it won't be extended. In fact, we've got a planning meeting associated with preparing for the assessment later this week. In terms of who can carry it out, it can be one of the professional bodies, so it could be the Institute of Internal Auditors or the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. Or equally, there can be a peer review arrangement where the assessment is carried out by another local authority in return for you carrying out the service for them. As it stands at the moment, we're in discussions with the Institute of Internal Auditors. We're quite keen that assessment is actually carried out by an external body, because that will give it so much more independence.
Thank you. Okay. Paragraph 3.5, you talk about the circumstances surrounding the fact that you arrived at a satisfactory assurance opinion for non-financial systems. And halfway down, you talk about there were some risks and impacts associated with control weaknesses in the information management audit. I think we are happy that those the recommendations made as a result of that audit have been implemented now.
Yes, as Ruth and colleagues were referring earlier, that's correct.
Yeah, fine. And a bit further down on this page, we talk about the Herts Home Improvement Agency, because I think we recall your initial audit of that body, which was a bit on the brutal side, and then you've undertaken a follow-up audit, which I think is in the process of being finalised. And actually, I note just one last point in your next report, in the high-profile recommendations that you make. A lot of the recommendations made around Herts Home Improvement have actually been implemented now, haven't they? So I think they seem to be in a much better place maybe than they were before. But I guess we'll have to wait for your audit when it comes out, I guess.
They are in a much better place. The status of the report, piece of work, is at draft report stage at the moment. One of my colleagues has a meeting with the managers who are responsible for Herts Home Improvement Agency later this week. Following that, we would expect to finalise the report and circulate it to all members of the committee. In response to the second point you raised, yes, you're quite right, Chairman. Many of the recommendations that have previously featured in one of the appendices of our progress report have since been implemented. We're just left with a few in the appendix for this report, but they all do show implemented, so it'll be off the agenda for future meetings.
Yeah, that's very good indeed. And lastly, I think on this report, for me anyway, on Appendix A, where you list the final position against the Council's 2019-2020 audit plan, you've got information management, which is, I think, again, that's in draft currently, and there's a high profile recommendation in that, and I couldn't see any evidence of what that was in this report. Are you able to share that with us now, or should we wait for that for the report to come out in its final form?
Simon, you're on mute.
Sorry, everybody. Yes, it links back to the issue that Helen and Ruth were talking about earlier in relation to having the information register. We have had the management response and we'll be issuing the final reports hopefully later this week or next.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, I don't know if there are any other, I don't think there are any other questions on this, in which case we need to go back to page
33.
33, sorry, forgive me. Page 33, the recommendations on page 33. Now, Simon, you mentioned that we need to seek an assurance from Bob in terms of the scope and resources of the internal audit were not subject to inappropriate limitations in 2019-20. I don't know if it's worth doing that now. So, Bob, are you able to give us that assurance?
Yes, absolutely, Chairman. There have been no restrictions on the scope or resources for internal audit.
Okay, thank you. Great. So we should know, obviously we'll be noting the fact that officers have confirmed that that assurance can be given. So the recommendations then, I'm invited to look at are to note the annual assurance statement and the internal audit annual report, and then to note the results of the self-assessment required by the public sector internal audit standards and the quality assurance and improvement programme, and to accept the SIAS audit charter. So are we happy to take those 4 recommendations en bloc? Thank you. So Councillor, that's a Corp you're proposing. Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Councillor Stowe, Councillor Costo, second. So we've got a proposal and a second. Are we all in favour? Fine. Okay, I think that's carried. Thank you very much indeed. So now we go on to the update, shared internal audit service progress report, which begins on page 57.
Thank you again, Chair. Yes, members, this report is an early update on where we are with delivering this year's internal audit plan. The key message at this point in time is that as at the 10th of July, earlier this month, 12% of the audit plan days have been delivered. You can see in paragraph 2.2 of the report, those final audit reports that have been issued since the committee last met. These audits largely relate to audits that were to be concluded from 2019-20. Over the page on page 60, paragraph 2.3, the table there shows the status of those audits in progress so far this year. With it being relatively early in the year, most are due to start in the coming months. We've got 6 audits in progress at the moment. We would ordinarily expect to be further ahead than we are. What I've explained in paragraph 2.4 to 2.8 is that we've had to reprofile the audit plan for this year. The reason for that being during April and May, staff within the internal audit service were redeployed to provide and assist with frontline support for COVID-19. In practical terms, had those staff not been redeployed, we would have had difficulty in any event, because that was not a good time to be carrying out audits with so many colleagues across the authority also being drawn into the council's response. So in effect, we had to pause the plan as originally determined, doing both April and May, and it's only been during July that we've really began to get further traction on delivering our audits again. In the report, I've set out some details of a number of audits that we felt it necessary to have to cancel. We've agreed that with Bob and his colleagues, the senior leadership team. Essentially, we can't deliver a full year's worth of work in 3/4 of a year, so we've had to cancel a number of the projects, and we've given an explanation for those audits that we do think we should cancel and why we think it's appropriate to do so. Moving on to Appendix B, which starts on page 66 of the report. That sets out the status of the high priority recommendations from our work over the previous month and going back into 2019-20. As you pointed out, Chair, the size of this appendix has begun to decrease over successive meetings, which is a good thing to say. We've got far less outstanding cybersecurity recommendations than we originally had. And aside from the incident management follow-up recommendation, the only other ones there relate to Parts Improvement Agency, which, as we mentioned earlier, have all now been implemented, and they'll be taken off of the appendix for future meetings. Lastly, the only other thing I wanted to draw your attention to was on page 73. There's a table there which sets out our annual programme of work, and it kind of shows you in a picture what I was trying to explain earlier in terms of how little work we were actually able to do in April and May, and how everything has kind of shunted forward to subsequent months. And I'll be bringing further progress reports back to future committee meetings, and you can see how we'll be progressing with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If there are any questions, I can't see. I had a couple of little points. Para 2.6, where you talked about the cancellations and amendments, and you mentioned under amendments that audit of Grange Paddocks and Hartham Leisure Centre will be undertaken by the council's external auditor, or the project will be. Is that kind of is that usual, or is that just really a function of what's been going on of late? And also, what could you just give us an idea of what aspects of those two bodies will be audited, if you could do that? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. It's unusual for internal audit and external audit work to overlap in this way. The subject matter would have been put into the internal audit plan when it was originally drawn up prior to Christmas last year. So it's not unusual that when it comes to actually deliver the plan, that amendments are made. In this particular case, I've had discussions with the relevant head of service, who has confirmed to me that the subject matter will be audited by the council's external auditors, and the scope of the audit will be specifically in relation to the procurement arrangements for the works that are being carried out at both Grange Paddocks and Hartham.
Will this work be undertaken as part of the annual audit, or will it be a separate piece of work by them? And also, I guess, will there be an additional cost involved for their work on this project?
If it helps, Chair, my understanding is that it will be completed as part of their value for money work, so it should form part of the main chunk of the audit.
Great, thank you, thank you. The other thing I just wanted to ask was, there was in Appendix B on one of your high profile points, incident management, which kind of begins on the, well, that's item 2 on Appendix B. And then where it talks about management comments, it talks about a verbal update will be provided at the committee meeting, which I guess is this meeting. I don't know who would do that. Would that be Helen?
It would, Chair, yes.
Is Helen still here? I can't see if she's here still.
Chairman, no, Helen's not online at the moment, sorry.
Okay. Well, could we maybe ask officers to provide a written response to this, or a written update for this matter? Can you see where I'm referring to?
I can, Chairman, yes.
That just as a verbal update will be provided at the committee meeting. Okay, I think that was it for me on this bit, on this report. Okay, in which case that takes us back, if there aren't any other questions, to page 57. And the recommendations we have, the 3 recommendations on page 57, to note the internal audit progress report, to approve the amendments to the internal audit plan as at 10th of July 2020, and to note the status of the critical and high priority recommendations. Members, are we happy to accept those recommendations? Could I have a proposal if we are? Councillor Fernando, thank you. And do we have a seconder?
Councillor Corp, I think.
Councillor Corp, thank you. So we have a proposal and a seconder. All in favour of those recommendations? Thank you. I think that's carried. Thank you very much indeed. Simon, I think, I don't know if you need to stay any longer. If you're not, then you're very welcome to leave if you feel you need to.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for your input. Thank you. So Nick, now we're on to anti-fraud, item 9, or old item 9, new item 10 on the agenda, beginning on page 75.
Good evening, Chair.
Evening, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Nick Jennings. I work for the Shared Anti-Fraud Service, or SAFS as we sometimes refer to it. It's a shared service that the Council has been a founding member of since 2015. The SAFS provides a counter-fraud function for this authority and 6 others across Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire. My report tonight covers all the counter-fraud activity at East Herts Council in 2019-2020, which is a sweeping statement, but hopefully it's a majority, if not all. And I will also provide members with a brief update on some of the work since March 2020, when the little issue of COVID arrived on our doorsteps. So for those new members, SAFS provides a variety of functions for the Council, from helping to develop policies and processes to deter fraud, fraud awareness training for staff and members around fraud risks, and the use of data and data analytics to prevent and identify fraud quickly, public and internal communications to help prevent fraud, and finally the investigation and prosecution of fraud where our other defences have failed us. So we also help to design an anti-fraud plan for each of our councils each year, and that's to ensure that the council itself and council officers, particularly senior officers in the council, acknowledge and understand the risk of fraud that it faces and has in place appropriate measures to mitigate and or manage those risks. So if I can just give members a very brief update of our work since March, and it's true to say that COVID-19 has put much of the delivery of our business as usual and our plan under review, as you've already heard from other officers, and certain parts of our service, such as face-to-face meetings, interviews, training, are all or have been suspended. We're starting to roll out some other options around interviews and training at present, and looking at meetings and use of Zoom and Teams and socially distanced meetings as well. So talking just about East Herts for a minute and some of the work that we've been doing, we've provided a lot of work for the revenues team to support it with its grant and discount payments. So this is the government scheme where grants were made available to small businesses, and then a discretionary scheme was introduced later to look at even smaller businesses. So we used a variety of systems that were available at the time, or we've accessed other systems for council officers to use to carry out prepayment assurance before they paid grants to any of the organisations that contacted them under those schemes. And officers were under immense pressure at the time to get those grants paid to companies as quickly as possible. and everybody understands the reason for that was to keep those businesses afloat at a time when they were really, really struggling. As part of that work, part of the prepayment work, we've received 5 so far, 5 reports of suspected grant frauds. So this is where it appears that information is being provided not by mistake, but a real attempt to defraud the authority. And those 5 cases are still under investigation at present. And we've also had 10 incidences reported. Now this is for Stevenage and East Herts, the 10 cases of phishing emails that are related to the grant schemes. And there's been some national attempts to disrupt and access data as part of the grant scheme by organised fraud or organised criminals using their ability to interrupt and disrupt services that we provide in the middle of a crisis. So we are looking at those matters at the moment, and some of those have already been reported to the National Anti-Fraud Network. We've reported them into BAYS as well, and we've also sent information to the National Cybercrime Centre as well. So currently on the grant schemes, so we're working with officers at the moment to look at post-payment assurance. So what we want to be able to do is for the authority to be able to provide some assurance to the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy that all the grants that were paid by East Herts Council were paid correctly and were paid to the right people at the right time. Or where the error and fraud has been identified, that grants were prevented, that we didn't pay the grant out in the first place, or that we're taking action to recover money that was paid incorrectly. So that's a piece of work that we're developing with officers at the moment, and that's going really, really well. And to have 5 cases reported from, I think it was around 1,600 applications, 5 cases of fraud, is very low. So I think members should have quite a lot of assurance around that payments were made to the right people at the right time. We've also done a lot of work, and sort of harping back to the presentation that members saw earlier, a lot of work around mandate and phishing frauds. So this is where we've got fraudsters trying to contact officers, make officers or induce officers to release information or money by using social media to access certain information about the council. So we've been pushing out a lot of alerts that come out from the Cabinet Office, from CIPFRA, from the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, CIFAS, Herts Police, Our Business Watch. We continue to work with the Neighbourhood Watch scheme locally, and the National Anti-Fraud Network as well. So Bob and his officers will be sick to death of the number of alerts that we've issued over the last 3 months that are linked to the risk of cyber-enabled fraud. Phishing emails as well. We've seen local residents targeted by phishing emails where the fraudsters are reporting to be from local authorities or banks or the government or other organisations, and the fraudsters are trying to trick vulnerable people into parting with their hard-earned cash. And just following up from what I said earlier, that now all suspected phishing, spam and scam emails that are reported into the Shared Anti-Fraud Service, we report those into the National Cyber Security Centre, and that allows a coordinated response nationally to take down emails and websites that have been used by fraudsters. And that's been really, really effective during COVID, because we've been able to report that very quickly, and the NCSC have acted really swiftly to take down some really, really dangerous sites. So that's just a very brief update on what we've been doing over the last 3 or 4 months for East Herts, as well as doing our day job around fraud investigation and fraud prevention work as well. So at page 75 of your bundle is my report with recommendations to review the council's work in preventing fraud, and also whether SAFs have achieved our KPIs that were agreed back in 2019. So the main body of the report, section 2, deals with the delivery of the anti-fraud plan, which I'll come back to talk about in a little bit more detail in a moment. We also talk at section 3 about the joint review. This was an internal audit conducted by BDO, focused on SAF's ability to deliver a return on investment and value for money for its partners. And we were very, very pleased with the outcome of that audit, that we got a good rating, which was the highest we could get. So very pleased with that. And then, so that is a huge pat on the back actually for my team. And I'm very happy to give them that pat on the back. They've worked really hard over the last couple of years. And then on section 4, we look at the transparency code and the counter fraud data that the council is required to publish. So this report, when it's published, will meet the requirements for the authority to disclose that information. And if I can just draw members again, before we go to main body report, there are 4 appendices attached with my report. They're all attached for a reason. We start off with Appendix A, which is the Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locally strategy. This is the new strategy for local government. It's got support from a very wide-ranging group of organisations, including CFAS now. So that's the Credit Industry Fraud Avoidance Service now support local government, as well as CIPFA, as well as Solace, the National Fraud Authority, MHCLG, and LGA, to name but a few. So the new strategy really does have wide-ranging support. And it's pleasing again that strategy does reinforce the plans that we already have in place for the authority. So it's we're in a very good place as far as the recommendations in the strategy. Appendix B is the plan that was agreed by this committee back in early 2019. So that's the plan itself. Appendix C, the most important part of the plan is the activity. So that's usually 1 page of the plan itself. And at Appendix C, members can find how well SAFs and council officers have done in delivering the plan that we put in place for last year. And that members have already picked up on some of the policies that we've brought forward from last year. We started some really, really good work towards the end of 2019. And James and Bob have been at the centre of that and putting in place some new strategies, new policies for the authority to adopt. And that now has been brought into this year. It's all been delivered or about to be delivered. So we're very, very pleased with those documents. And then finally, Appendix D, we've got the fraud statistics for East Herts Council, and that gets down into a real granular detail of what types of fraud have been investigated, what the outcomes were, and the financial values from that activity as well. So if we could just very briefly, I'm going to whip through the main body of the report. So just going to page 79. So that's got our KPIs, the SAFs KPIs for 2019-2020. You'll see there that at 5A and 6A and 6B, we either failed to achieve our targets or we brought work into the current year to resolve. Certainly in relation to 6A and 6B, they're all working at the moment and have all been delivered in the current year. 5A is always problematic for us. In East Herts, we set ourselves a target to receive a certain number of allegations of fraud, which is a bit strange. It's the reason we've removed it from our plan for the current year and replaced it with something which is more about how we respond to reported fraud, although we'll still report on the number and type of fraud that's been reported to the authority. So although we've missed that target, actually we've never achieved it over the 5 years of SAFs. And members can see it, section 2.10. We've had 81 referrals or allegations of fraud received in relation to the council in 2019-2020. And then at table 3, members can see there how sporadic reporting can be. We've had a target of 100 for about the last 3 years. We've never hit that target, which in some ways perhaps provides some assurance, because in the other districts that we work with, where we set a similar target, we are meeting or exceeding that target. So perhaps there isn't as much fraud to report in East Herts, but we can't be complacent about that. We need to make sure that the officers and members of the public are able to report fraud to us. So that's what we've changed our focus to in the current plan, which members saw earlier this year. Between pages 81 and 83, we provide some further detail on some specific counter-fraud work at East Herts Council and some of the cases that we dealt with. Particularly just to mention section 2.13, the use of fines as alternatives to prosecution on council tax discounts. We find that's a very effective way to deal with that low level offending and assist not only in applying a fine, which delivers some additional revenue for the authority, but actually assist in the recovery as well. And we do see it as having a deterrent effect. Section 2.14, we are still working very, very closely with our colleagues at the DWP Fraud and Error Service to investigate housing benefit fraud, where that's linked to other fraud affecting East Herts Council. there's been some issues with staffing within the DWP because of delivery of universal credit, and then the COVID crisis from March. That's impacted on some of that work, but we still maintain an excellent relationship with those officers. And at 2.16, we mentioned the work where we're working very, very closely with parking enforcement officers, civil enforcement officers, around the abuse of council blue badges in council car parks. And we mentioned a particular case that we dealt with last year. And then at 2.17, we just cover the publicity and the work that we're doing with the communications team to make sure that East Herts is involved in activity to get a message out about prevention and deterrence of fraud. We cover that there. And then lastly, on page 83, section 2.18, there's actually a typo in there. That's my fault. That section should read that the council did take part in the council tax framework in 2019-2020 and has been very effective in its use of it. And then again with the National Fraud Initiative, we mentioned there that work wasn't complete at year end, but actually when we look at the high priority matches that have been the focus of officers' work, and that's quite correct, the vast majority of those high priority matches have been resolved and dealt with, and again that's delivered considerable savings for the authorities. So again, in comparison to other district councils across the region, the sort of feedback and outcomes from the officers' work on the National Fraud Initiative for 18-19 has been very effective. That is my report in very, very brief summary. Chairman, I'm more than happy to take questions.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that. Thank you. Councillor Alder, I think you had a question.
First of all, can I congratulate the officers who've dealt with the grant process, because it's been really well received, and I think we've earned a lot of brownie points in the process. It's been really, really excellent. The staff have worked really hard. I'm sorry that there've been some fraud, five cases I think was mentioned. Perhaps we could know what that would represent in terms of hard cash. But also, Mr. Chairman, my device keeps freezing, so I feel I'm not able to follow everything because it keeps disappearing. So with your permission, may I leave the meeting, because I've keep freezing out. Sorry about that.
Okay, Councillor Alder, can I just check, if you do leave, will we still be quorate officers?
Yes, Chairman.
We've lost Councillor Curtis, I believe. This is back.
Yeah, I've been trying to call him unsuccessfully, but I think he's still okay.
Okay, good. Okay, well, Councillor Alder, if you wish to, you can retire early, as it were.
Yes, well, it's just that when you keep disappearing, it's not much fun because I keep trying to get you back.
No, I can imagine.
So I have mentioned this earlier today to IT and to Will, who was going to mention it to you, I think, or to Peter, that it kept freezing. But regarding the grants process, I think the council have done a wonderful job, and the staff concerned have. They've been extremely helpful to all the applicants. As I say, I'm sorry about the ones who've been fraudulent, and I'd like to know what how much money that represents. But in the meantime, perhaps that could be emailed to me after the meeting. But if, with your permission, because I keep losing you all, I will retire. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you. Well, perhaps we'll ask the question that Councillor Alder raised. Perhaps you could copy in everybody so we could all know the answer to that question, perhaps.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I'm fairly certain that we didn't make payments on any of those five, so they were all prevented. But I will double check that just to make sure.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night, sir. Good night, all. Sorry about this.
Good night to you. Thank you.
Good night.
Councillor Stowe, you have a question, I think.
Yeah, more than a comment on the question, but I just wondered, you say about you never reached 100 in 1 year, but in 16-17 you got 143, and the rest of it was fairly level, really, wasn't it? Around, just under the 100. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts why that happened. That was one point I was interested in. And also I thought it was an amazing comment on page 83 about the single person's discount amounted to something like £100,000 to the council. I couldn't believe that. But yeah, thank you.
Chad, shall I just take those 2 points? I think the first one was I think I've only written one down actually, which was the comment about single person discount fraud. That's £100,000 in additional revenue. So clearly, as always with council tax revenue, the council only retains a certain element of that, but that is additional revenue as a result of that exercise. And then was there another question, Chair, that I've missed, Councillor Stowe?
It was the one about 16, 17, we managed to read 143, yeah. Yet the rest of the time, and over the 5 years, it's been fairly steady at the same sort of area, really. I wonder if you could pull a reason to that, really.
One of the reasons was that was our second full year, and we went back and looked at some of the NFI work that hadn't been undertaken previously. So we're able to bring some work in via some data analytics that we did that year. We don't normally count that as a referral though. So nowadays a referral to us is something which has come externally. The proactive work that we do where we're doing data matching and data analytics, we report on that separately.
Thank you. On 2.6, the table under para 2.6, which talks about your kind of KPIs, and you talk about training. One of the benefits of being a member of this organisation is that you provide training to staff, and that training events are agreed with HR. What sort of staff training do you provide? Ooh. Nick, I think you're on mute. You're on mute.
You're quite right. I'm on mute. This year we did some work with the civil enforcement officers around their new powers on seizing blue badges. We've done some work with the customer service teams at both sites around identity and use of false identity documents to obtain various council services.
I think he's frozen a bit there, Chairman.
He has.
Yes. Maybe just to do any other questions, and we'll come back to him in a minute.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if there are any other questions, or clearly Nick's a bit indisposed at the moment, but I guess it doesn't look as though there are.
And it might also.
Oh, it's back again.
Oh, hello.
Sorry, Nick.
Am I frozen?
We lost you there for maybe a minute.
Okay. Am I back now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you just got to talking about false identification.
Right, that was the false identification that we did for customer service teams. And then this year, we've got some work planned via the National Anti-Fraud Network to do some work for that's not related to fraud necessarily, but there are services that it provides. So it will perhaps assist the housing team with confirming details of housing applicants, or the council tax team with debt recovery. Have I frozen again?
No, you're all right. Carry on.
I'm out in the fens, so I'm aware that I may freeze occasionally. So yeah, there is a whole host of various training events that we provide, and obviously there's the e-learning platform as well, which will tie into council policies in the future as well.
Thank you. Para 2.10. You talk about. I think we talked about this earlier, or touched earlier, about the council reviewing its anti-fraud and corruption policies, including those on anti-bribery and whistleblowing.
Yeah.
What sort of form does that take? Who undertakes that review?
Well, it would normally be either your Section 151 or your monitoring officer to make sure there is a policy in place. And what we will do then is we will make sure that policy meets the standards that are set out in the new strategy. So have you got a hotline for reporting fraud? Do you deliver training? Are staff aware what their fraud risks are? We need to make sure they're all encompassed in a strategy. So it isn't just a toothless product, it actually has some value.
Because I was wondering whether we might ask James maybe whether this committee should look at those sorts of policies from time to time. I don't know, maybe that's not a question for you. I don't know whether, I don't know whether Lorraine or Will, you've got an opinion whether this committee might at some point look at, you know, these policies, just so it can be aware of what they are, as it were.
Lorraine, you're on mute, but I thought I was going to make a suggestion that you speak to that.
Yes, Chairman, we could have a look with James if we can be specific on what policies you'd want to have a look at.
Yeah. Okay. Well, things like the anti-bribery, whistleblowing, and anti-fraud and corruption policies. I mean, the ones that are really mentioned in para 2.10 of this report. Maybe. Anyway, we can talk about that maybe towards the end of the meeting when we talk about the work programme. Maybe.
I think, Chairman, as well, though, these would be policies which the head of human resources and organisational development would be charged with looking at. But certainly I could raise it with James and he can guide us.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I don't know if there are any other questions or points. I don't think there are. If not, we could go back to the recommendations, which will be on page 75. So the two recommendations are reviewing the council's work to combat fraud in 1920 and review the performance of SAFS in meeting its KPIs in 1920. Are we happy for a proposer for those recommendations?
I'm happy to propose.
Councillor Corb is a proposer. And we have a seconder, and Councillor Wall-Booth is a seconder. Thank you. All those in favour? I think that's unanimous. I think so. Those recommendations are carried. Thank you very much indeed. Nick, thank you very much indeed for your report. You're very welcome to stay.
That's fine. I'll go if that's all right.
Pleasure. Thanks. Nice to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice evening, everybody. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye. Thank you. That brings us on to old item 10, new item 11, the general fund revenue and capital outturn, beginning on page 129.
Yep.
Bob, is this one of yours?
It is. Thank you, Chairman. Yes. Yeah, so it starts on page 129. In terms of the key points to note, the revenue outturn was actually very close to budget, only an underspend of 16,000 there. The capital budget, the outturn was rather different because of delays to several of the capital schemes. So about 31 million is suggested for carry forward in respect to those capital schemes. So if we just work our way down through the report, the first table summarises the 1920 revenue outturn position and shows that underspend of 16,000 that we will be taking to the general reserve. The net cost of services line, there's only a variance there of 33,000 against expenditure of over 14 million. So that's come out very close to the budget overall. And there aren't any additional or different variances, more significant variances to those that were reported as part of the Q3 report. The corporate budgets, then the next table, table 2, the only significant variance there is on the interest and investment income, where we've done 149,000 better than had been anticipated. And that was primarily due to the performance of the property funds. That amount we will also take to reserve to allow us to offset subsequent lower performance in terms of investments. As I'm sure members will be aware, since the pandemic, the interest rates are even lower, and the property funds, in common with other landlords, are now finding it more difficult to get the rent out of the tenants. Although thankfully it is a good range of properties that both of those property funds have invested in. So ultimately those returns will come back. And then the reserve section in table 3. This is the main point to note, really, in terms of the revenue. In 1920, it's set out in paragraph 3.10. There is just over 2.5 million that we'll be transferring to a collection fund reserve, again to enable smoothing of potential future deficits when there are changes in the non-domestic rate system. That additional amount is broken down in table 4. So you can see that 1.8 million of that comes from the non-domestic rates in section 31 income. That's where the growth in the business rates rating list has been slightly higher than we'd anticipated. Also, the section 31 income we've done better on than had been anticipated. Section 31 income is what the government is required to pay over to us, where they change the terms of the business rate scheme once the financial year is actually underway, and we got in quite a lot of money through that. We also got in just over 700,000 as a result of our participation in a business rates retention pilot with the county council and other district and borough councils in Hertfordshire. But because of the nature of that pool, because the outcomes of it were reliant on how all those other authorities performed, it wasn't prudent to actually allow for anything in the budget, and it is just a one-off gain of 700,000. So that's how that additional 2.5 million has arisen, which is very helpful. That then takes us on to the capital outturn that's set out in table 5. As you can see, we had a programme of 41.6 million, of which only 10.7 million was spent, leaving us about 31 million to carry forward. The largest single item there is 19 million in relation to the Northgate End car park. And thankfully, all of the issues around judicial reviews, COVID and various other problems have now been dealt with. Work, Rydens are on site constructing that car park. So that's good news that that's now happening on the ground. Of course, Grange Paddocks was delayed, but that's now taking place as well. So I'm sure all of those large amounts of capital that we have carried forward, we will see being used during the course of this next financial year. There are appendices, Appendix A setting out the various reserve movements, and Appendix B providing more detail in terms of the capital underspend. But I think that's all I'd like to say for the moment, Chairman. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that. And thank you very much indeed for your report, which was very detailed and very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Corb, I think you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So yes, thank you very much for this report. There's a lot of information and it's very useful. Forgive me if I'm mistaken here, but I believe that some of these figures were already seen in the minutes of the executive that happened most recently, I believe, earlier this month. Am I mistaken to think that, well, maybe it'd be more appropriate for some of these reports to come to this committee first before going to executive, or is that just me misunderstanding the kind of structure of how these reports are delivered?
No, you are entirely correct there, Councillor Corp. That would be what would happen in the normal course of events. Unfortunately, because of where we are with the pandemic and with the concern from the executive around financial data, they have asked for financial information to be presented to them as soon as it is actually available. So that meant that it did go to the executive. Where were we? Yeah, on the 7th of July. If we had waited to bring it to this meeting first and then on to the executive, it wouldn't have got to the executive until the 1st of September, 2 months later, effectively. So, yeah, but ideally, what I really want us to be in a position going forward is actually try and get the calendar worked out a bit better and lined up a bit better, so we can get these reports produced more promptly, get them coming to audit and governance, and then on to the executive in a rather more satisfactory timescale. I'm sure you'd agree that it wouldn't really be right for the executive to wait for this report until the 1st of September.
No, of course, I guess we live in exceptional times, but I think it is important to make the point that, you know, the whole point of having a committee to review these figures on behalf of the executive is that the work isn't duplicated, and that, well, the current setup seems somewhat inefficient, I suppose. So I'm glad to hear that your suggestion is to avoid this in the future, maybe by rejigging the schedule to make it maybe more more logical in that sense. Okay, thank you. Actually, if I may, I have a second question.
Yeah, carry on.
Sorry, Chairman, just to interject briefly, we seem to have lost Will again, taking the minutes, so I'll just try and get him back. So just probably hold fire on making any decision until I get him back so we can log that.
Well, do you want us to pause for a moment, or are we happy to
Depends
continue?
on the level of the debate, but I'll mute myself and I'll try and get him back.
Okay. Councillor Cook, did you have another question? You want to?
Yes. Well, I guess a remark about this £16,000 of underspend. It's obviously nice to see that we're not overspending by too much. And I don't know, my hope would be that maybe some of this money that we underspent from one year to the next could be invested in certain schemes that we've had to cut, you know, tightening our belt in the past. I know there are lots of schemes such as the PCSOs, and as I keep banging on about the citizens' advice, which could benefit from an investment about this size. And I suppose we've already set the budget for this year, but you know, is this the kind of project that movements into the General Reserve could be spent on, or is this now, I mean, what happens to this money, basically?
So the money goes into the General Reserve and is available there to support whatever projects or spending members wanted to pursue. As much as this report has already gone to the executive, it is still within the ability of the committee to make a recommendation or a comment back to the executive. So if your fellow committee members wanted to come up with a recommendation around the use of that 16,000 underspend, that could then go back to the executive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman, I've just spoken to Will.
Yes.
He's trying to rejoin. He is following the meeting on the YouTube live stream. He's going to try and rejoin.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for letting us know. Okay, we'll continue then. So are there any, I don't think there are any other questions. In terms of the net cost of services, obviously there was an underspend under that heading, but obviously that was net of a use of the £750,000 use of reserves, wasn't it? I think we've already been briefed on the reasons for the need to use of reserves in that area. And so, whilst there is in the context of the figures we've got, there is an underspend. Actually, underpinning that is a use of reserves, which maybe wasn't planned for at the beginning of the year.
That's correct, Chairman. Some of that additional use of reserves was needed. Inevitably, during the course of a year, there will be issues that come up that haven't been anticipated. And so, yes, authority is then obtained to fund those issues if they are of sufficient priority from the reserves.
So I think that this kind of demonstrates the need for the council to maintain a healthy level of reserve, which is why, when there are circumstances where there are underspends, then it is prudent, I think, to transfer these sums of money to the council reserves in case they're needed for eventualities like we've had that before us during the course of the year.
Yes, I would completely support that, Chairman, and it is helpful as we are anticipating reductions going forward in terms of our investment income and in terms of our non-domestic rates as well. So it is helpful that we have been able to add money this year into the reserves to deal with those problems subsequently.
For instance, I think most of the money, the biggest part of that use of reserves came out of the New Homes Bonus Priority Spend Reserve, didn't it? I believe.
That's correct, Chairman. Yes, that is the reserve that is most commonly dipped into to finance unanticipated activities.
Thank you. Thank you. Appendix A. I don't know if we can go to Appendix A. Actually, we have. Councillor Cobb, do you have another question?
Well, I suppose it was. Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman.
Sure.
It was to kind of bounce back off that, and I do agree that I think I'd kind of maybe not fully appreciated that it wasn't really an underspend so much as an overspend. You know, with reserve movements, and then this looks like an underspend of 16,000. But maybe this is the sort of thing that should be kind of highlighted a little bit more when, in fact, a lot of this has been subsidised by additional movements from the reserve. For example, in this draft statement of accounts, maybe this should be kind of highlighted a little bit more visibly in the introduction and such. Just a suggestion.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess officers can take that on board, and if they feel that an amendment or an adjustment can be made to the accounts to maybe highlight that more, then that can be done, and we'll see that in the next version of the accounts that we see.
Thank you.
I think that's okay. I don't know if there are any other questions. On Appendix A, we seem to be building up the flexible homelessness grant. Can officers give us an idea of what that will be used for? I guess grants for homeless people, I guess, but it doesn't appear to have been used during the year. In what circumstances might it be used? Can you give us any colour on that, maybe?
Can I jump in on that one? So this is funding we receive from central government to support homelessness and our delivery in that area. So this is leftover grant monies that we don't spend in the year. So we don't have to then pay it back to central government. So it's transferred into reserves to enable us to use it for initiatives in future years.
Okay, so is it used? I mean, because it doesn't appear to have been used this year, for instance, but maybe in other years, maybe it has. But I just want to make sure that we are doing what we can to use this grant where it's needed.
So from memory, we've received about 250,000 in 1920, and then we've used around half of that and are transferring the remainder into the reserves.
I see. Okay, thank you.
It's being spent during the year.
Okay, thank you. And then again, under the capital outturn appendix, under things like housing and health, we've got a number of sort of positions like 60,000 under disabled facilities discretionary, which wasn't used. Decent homes grants, again, that wouldn't appear to be used. I guess this may not be something that I need to be addressing to you, Alison, but I just wondered, there are a number of areas where the grant funding seems to have been available, but it hasn't been used for one reason or another. And I just want to maybe gain some assurance that that we're trying to use or are trying to identify opportunities to use it for the right projects.
My understanding is that officers are promoting these schemes. There's perhaps a delay in the decent homes grants being promoted, but these are being looked at in this current year.
Okay, and then towards the bottom of that page, we've got Launchpad 2, which was, we had a budget of 201. Can you provide a bit of colour on Launchpad 2?
Launchpad relates to the facility and where, I believe.
Well, I wondered if it was.
Yeah.
I wondered if it was.
Yeah, so I believe there's just a delay in the works being carried out there.
Because I think that is kind of up and running. Because obviously I'm aware, councillor, so I'm aware that the space that's been allocated in the Priory in where. So again, perhaps we just need to look to see how quickly that money will come on stream. Are there any more questions? I don't think there are. In which case we need to go back, if members are happy to go back to the recommendation, which is on page 129. There are two recommendations, and these relate to the transfer to the general fund revenue outturn, the revenue outturn of £16,000 to the general reserve, and then the capital budgets of 30.898 million be carried forward to the following financial year to fund the ongoing capital project schemes. Are we happy to adopt those recommendations, members? If so, could I have a proposer? Could Councillor Stote propose and Councillor Fernando to second Thank you. So I've opposed and a seconder. All those in favour, those recommendations, I think that's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Chairman, just to let you know that Will, minute taker, is following the meeting on YouTube, so you'll have got that.
Well, thank you. Okay, thank you. So then that brings us to old item 11, new item 12 on the agenda, the draft statement of accounts, beginning on page 145. Bob, I think you're on again.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this, as you know, every year the draft statement of accounts comes forward. Over the last couple of years, there have been various changes and shuffling about in the calendar for it. This year, we were meant to have published draft accounts by the 31st of May and audited accounts by the 31st of July. What's happened with the pandemic, the government have introduced regulations to address some of the difficulties that we're having in working in these conditions. And so we're now required to produce a draft statement of accounts by the 31st of August and then publish the audited accounts by the 30th of November. So by publishing the draft accounts on this agenda, Alison and Ashok and the whole finance team have done a really good job. You've actually got a published set of draft accounts here a month before the statutory deadline. And assuming that the audit runs smoothly, and that's the indications we've had so far from Suresh and his colleagues, that there shouldn't be any hold-ups. So we're hopeful of coming back with the audited accounts on the 22nd of September. So that will actually be 2 months ahead of the statutory deadline. So, so that's very good. So that's the first point in terms of the amended timetable. The second part, in terms of scrutinising the account, most places where I've worked, and I think here previously, in the meeting that considers the draft accounts, you would normally have a pre-meeting and something of a seminar to try and explain key features of the accounts. Of course, in the current circumstances, that's rather more difficult. So what I've tried to set out for you in the accompanying report here, Chairman, is the main items that members should be bearing in mind in looking at the accounts and evaluating them. And those are set out under paragraph 2.6. The 3 things to really be considering: critical accounting policies and practices and any changes to them, any decisions requiring a major element of judgment, and the extent to which the accounts might have been affected by any unusual transactions, and that those unusual transactions have been properly disclosed. In terms of the critical accounting policies and practices, one thing that we were expecting to be amending the accounts for and introducing this year was IFRS 16 on leasing. That's been deferred for another year again as a result of COVID. So the only significant thing to draw out is that Millstream Property Investments Limited, the council's wholly owned subsidiary, is being consolidated this year, and we're preparing group accounts for the first time. Millstream was trading at the previous year end, but at that point the level of activity was much smaller, and so it wasn't material to the council's accounts as a whole, so there was no need to bring it in last time round. Now it's got assets with a value exceeding 2.3 million, so clearly that needs to come into the council's own main accounts. The audit of Millstream has been conducted by a firm called Ensors, and that's very close to completion now. And the group accounts are shown at the end of the statements, the draft statements that are in front, that are also on the agenda. And the main difference in those group accounts, it does bring together and effectively shows the external position for the group being the council itself and Millstream. So where there are transactions between the two, those are effectively cancelled out. and the position represents the group's position with the world externally, rather than having those internal items. Moving on to decisions requiring a major element of judgment. In closing any set of accounts, we don't have perfect data because we are closing quite close to the year end. So there are still a number of transactions and events to be determined. So we are required to make estimates and provisions for a number of issues. The first item in terms of requiring a major element of judgment is whether the accounts should be prepared on a going concern basis. Clearly, if it's deemed that the going concern basis isn't appropriate, then assets need to be written down and values adjusted accordingly. You'll see when we look at the annual accounts, the council has got a very healthy balance sheet and good amounts of cash on hand, so there is no doubt about the council's ability to continue for the foreseeable future. The other items are covered within note 4 on page 32 of the draft accounts. Assumptions are made about the future and other major sources of estimation uncertainty. Key area there being the pension fund, and we do see significant fluctuations in that from year to year. Those are set out under paragraph 2.16 for the last 5 years, showing those significant movements in the assets and liabilities. The fact that the liability has changed from 34.5 million this year down to 23.5 million. Sorry, it was at 34.5 million in the last financial year, and it's down to 23.5 million in this financial year. The primary reason for that is the reduction in the rate of inflation that the actuary has used in calculating these figures. The rate of inflation is key because that determines the assumed level of future wage increases, and clearly where you're anticipating wages increasing at a much lower rate, that means the liabilities accumulating in the fund do so much more slowly. So that change in assumptions has effectively knocked off about 10% of the projected liabilities. One thing I should stress as well, that including that pension liability within the council's accounts, that's not an amount that we have to pay over anytime soon. The actuary sets contribution rates every 3 years, and those are aimed at recovering the deficit over an extended period. Property, plant and equipment is another area requiring significant estimation and judgment. Property, plant and equipment itself is on the balance sheet at 63 million, and investment properties another 15.5 million. We are very fortunate in terms of the quality and abilities of staff in the property team. We do have qualified surveyors, and they produce the valuation reports for us. We also set out what the effect of a change in those valuations could be. So, for example, at the top of page 150, the potential movement of 5% in the valuation of property, plant and equipment could have a value, an effect on the total value of 5.7 million, and the associated annual depreciation charge would change by 80,000 if that was to be the case. Final point to mention in terms of estimating provisions is around outstanding non-domestic rates and appeals against valuations. Unfortunately, the Valuation Office Agency has got something of a backlog still. We have seen that come down a little bit with the change in the system that they've made to try and discourage speculative appeals, but there is still an awful lot of cases to be settled. Paragraph 2.21 reflects the the fact that some of those have been settled in the year, and that's allowed us to reduce our provision from 8.9 million down to 7.1 million. And that is that provision is calculated with the assistance of external rating experts who do provide an analysis on a case-by-case basis of those outstanding appeals. Just moving on, finally, to do with the unusual transactions and their disclosures. Within the council's own accounts, there haven't been any unusual transactions. Within the accounts of Millstream, there was a prior year adjustment in the current year's accounts because the assets had not been correctly valued at the previous year end. So it was necessary for those assets to be restated and their values increased. That increase in value did create a deferred tax liability, but we don't have to pay that tax over until a gain is realised. So that just sits on the balance sheet. That isn't a tax loss to the authority. The draft statement of accounts are presented in their entirety. As it's 20 past 9 already, Chairman, I'm sure members will be glad to hear I don't propose to go through them on a page-by-page basis. That they are draft accounts, they are subject to audit, so there is opportunity between now and the closure of the audit for members to raise any questions or email us with any further comments or issues. But obviously, if anybody has anything pressing they'd like to ask tonight, then hopefully with the help of Alison and Ashok, we'll be able to answer those.
Well, thank you very much indeed. The report was incredibly useful. Thank you. It was a very detailed report and very useful indeed. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation this evening too. I can't see that there are any questions just now. You mentioned paragraph 2.7, the fact that we, had things been different, then we would have included the requirements of IFRS 16 with regard to leases in these accounts. How much of a piece of work would that have been had we had to have done it?
It is quite a bit of work in terms of producing all of the analysis that supports it. This is actually the second time that the implementation of IFRS 16 has been postponed. So we have done a bit of preparatory work in the background both times. And the indication from those bits of initial work is that it's not going to have a material impact on the accounts. There will be quite a lot of paperwork and quite a lot of data to provide. And I dare say it'll be something else that will cost us more to get audited, but we don't anticipate it making a significant difference to the figures.
Thank you. I mean, your comments and indeed the paragraph 2.14 on the regard to the council's pension liability. I mean, look, it's interesting, and these calculations were again we were assisted by an actuary in terms of confirming this liability. But it's the smallest liability the council's had for a number of years, as shown by the table under para 2.16. And it's interesting that I guess I think we talked about this earlier about the level of inflation will be sort of considered at a point in time, because I think there's a number of sort of pieces of news suggesting that maybe COVID might cause inflation in this country to go up. So maybe, if we're sitting here next year, maybe we'll be looking at a different story. But I guess the accounts have to be struck at a certain date, and at a certain date, the level of inflation is quite low.
The level of inflation that the actuary uses is their prediction on inflation going forwards. So when the actuaries came up with these figures, it wasn't inflation at that point in time. It was their view.
It's a projection
going forward. But yes, each year they reevaluate all of the assumptions, assumptions around longevity. How long people are going to draw their pension for. They look at the discount rate that's applied and how that changes. That often affects the value of the liabilities. This year is unusual because you'll note that the value of the assets has actually fallen. And that's the first time that's happened. So yeah, depending on different factors and assumptions that are in play, both the assets and liabilities can move in either direction.
Sure. And again, in para 2.24, you mentioned under unusual transactions the fact that some of the assets within Millstream had been probably undervalued. And I think it's right to mention to note that those accounts weren't audited at that time, were they? So they weren't subject to audit, and so I think they were undervalued. So there may be a concern. I think they were probably valued at cost in those accounts at the time, and so I guess there's just been an uplift, or there would have been an uplift maybe between the date of purchase and the date of the accounts, maybe.
That's correct, Chairman. Yes, there were 3 properties in particular that when they were sold to Millstream by the East Herts, they had a discount applied to them for the 3 of them being sold at one time. Last year, the accounts weren't audited. It was only this year, when the accounts were audited, that the external auditors checked the values of each property against current market data, and it highlighted for these 3 properties in particular that there was quite a discrepancy, and that was primarily due to the discount that had been attached to them when they were initially disposed of. So that discount was written back, so you ended up with a prior year adjustment, actually correcting the previous year's balance sheet. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I've got a few minor comments on the accounts, which I think I don't propose to go through them now. And I think I would invite members, if they've got any comments on the accounts, maybe to email you, Bob, with them, so they can be factored into the draft.
Yes, please, Chairman. That would be really helpful if people could do that. Yeah.
I'm just going to ask a really quick one on under item note 17, page 55, which is assets held for sale, and I think the council held one asset held for sale at the end of at the year end as a result of a compulsory purchase. Is the valuation of that asset, would that be cost?
Sorry, Chairman, could you give me the page again?
It's page 55 of the accounts. I haven't got the pack, and it's note 17, and it's entitled assets held for sale.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through to it.
I'm guessing it probably would. That would be valued at cost, I should imagine.
Sorry, Chair, can I just jump in on that one? It is held for the cost that it was valued at. It was valued at the end of February, I believe. So that's the cost it was held at.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, great. Well, look, if I'll send you my minor comments after the meeting, and if members have got their own comments, if they send them directly to maybe you, Alison, and to Bob, so you can have a look at them and see if they should be incorporated into the draft. So we need to go back then, if members are happy to, then, having had that conversation, back to the recommendations on page 145. There are 2 recommendations on this page, which is that that members note the amended timetable for the production and auditing of the financial statements, and B, that we scrutinise the following report, which we've done, and the draft statement of accounts, which we've done. So are members happy with those 2 recommendations? If so, could we have a proposer? Councillor Fernando, lovely, and a seconder. Councillor Ward Booth, thank you. Got a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour of those recommendations? That's all in favour, thank you. Brilliant. Bob, thanks very much again, and also Alison for your input on that item. Thank you very much indeed. So that brings us on to item 13, which is the work programme. Lorraine, is this your...
We've lost Will again, but hopefully I'll just check these still following, so keep going for the minute.
Okay, we're nearly done, aren't we? Lorraine, are you going to take this item?
Yes, Chairman. I'll be brief, Chairman. This is your usual work programme that Audit and Governance, the now Audit and Governance considers. The performance function was taken out of the remit of A&G and placed within the remit of Scrutiny Committee. We do have, as Bob has mentioned previously, the Centre for Public Scrutiny undertook a review of the OS function recently in May, and we're hoping for that report to be published shortly, which will give us hopefully some guidance in relation to the governance aspect which is more predominantly within the gift of Audit and Governance Committee. I haven't got an awful lot to say. There was a constitution review work group, or rather there is going to be a constitution review work group established, and there was some suggestion, and I'm looking at para 2.6, when we had a meeting in June to coordinate the work programs, that you might want to set up a small review group to review how the constitution, the workings of the work group. Yeah. So that is something you might want to consider. From the conversations that we've had this evening, you probably will want to review the work programme to include a further update on the retention scheme mentioned earlier on in the agenda, and further information on fraud policies and track changes to the next meeting in September. I haven't got anything else to add, Chairman.
Thank you. So in your paragraph 2.5, you mentioned that, you know, what you've just been discussing about the role of this committee and what sort of aspects of the council's affairs it should look at. And I think we'll wait for some guidance on that.
Yeah.
I think the two large areas that I kind of looked at or thought about, I guess, it was section 106, which Councillor Stowe mentioned earlier, and hopefully maybe we will be able to examine the situation with regard to section 106 in a similar way that we did before. It would have been a year previously when we came to September 2019. And the other area that I certainly believe that this council should have a role is it's with regard to its large capital projects, and to make sure, or to scrutinise that those projects are running on budget. But again, I guess we just need to wait for some guidance from the external review of our governance or our committee structures, I guess, and also what the head of legal and democratic services has to say on that matter.
Yeah, I mean, because the idea is not to sort of duplicate the function, which is why the performance aspect was taken out of PAYGO as it formerly was. Yes. So we'll see what they have to say, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more clarity there. And certainly within when the constitution is going to be reviewed, James has suggested that there might be of putting a little bit more information in there in relation to, you know, governance as he sees this role of Audit and Governance Committee moving forward on.
Okay, and then as you mentioned, your paragraph 2.6 with regard to the review of the constitution, or aspects of the constitution, or whether or not this committee would like to maybe set up a smaller group to look at that in the first instance. What do members think? Would members think that's a good idea, and would they be interested in being part of that group? I mean, there's not many of us to start with, so the group's going to be quite small, I would say, but maybe 2 or 3 councillors maybe.
If we have names, Chairman, as well, that might be quite useful.
Yeah, so members, do you think that would be a good idea to establish a smaller group to look at the constitution? Councillor Wall-Booth, sorry, you've got a hand up, beg your pardon.
Yeah, I had 2 questions, but I'll chip in on that as well. Yeah, it seems like a good idea, and as a lawyer, I like nothing better than long constitutional documents, so I'm happy to put my name down for that.
That sounds okay, thank you.
I just had a quick question for Lorraine, and then a suggestion for a work topic.
Yeah.
The work topic would just be about information management and GDPR compliance. Just going back to the annual report that we considered earlier, that had some issues to do with data retention and sort of keeping and destroying data, etc., which is a fairly fundamental part of GDPR.
Yeah,
so I'd be keen for us to have an update about the progress of that.
You're absolutely right, and we did ask him. I did mention that to Helen when she was here, and I think she said she would bring an update to next meeting. But it's a very good point.
Just to make sure that it does.
Yeah, quite right.
And then Lorraine, the Centre for Public Scrutiny report. Do we have any idea when we're going to get that? Because the interviews all took place at the end of May, and we're now at the end of July.
Yeah. I have chased Ian Parrott, the Centre for Public Scrutiny, on 2 occasions. He said that they're running a little bit behind. He hoped to get a report out by the end of this week. I've been having a chat to James Ellis, our Head of Legal and Democratic Services, and we are on top of it. We are tracing. So hopefully something will come to the Chief Exec by the end of this week. But we're tracing.
Thank you. Okay, going back to the constitution review and the working group, Councillor Wall-Booth, I think you've indicated you might be interested. Anybody else? I mean, Councillor Corp, would you be interested in being involved?
I think it's certainly important for it to exist, but I wonder whether we should discuss offline with the other members of the committee who are not able to, well, who had to disconnect or who weren't able to be present to establish the full membership of this.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to do it offline. Maybe I'd do it by email, but I think we're only looking probably for maybe 3 or 4 maximum people to be involved in this, because there's not many of us to start with.
And may I ask if the idea is that this would, I mean, how often and how long for would this constitutional review committee need to be meeting? I think I'm just trying to gauge what the kind of work program for that meeting would be.
Well, maybe if I send an email around, I can include a bit more information about sort of how many meetings and when and how long they would last. But typically these things normally 3 or 4 meetings. Do you think, Lorraine, something like that perhaps?
I don't want to be I don't want to step on the toes of the people who are actually involved in the constitution, the main group, but certainly I can go back to James and Rebecca and whoever is involved in the actual working group to say that there is a appetite for members of audit, some members, a small number of members of audit and governance committee to be involved in the process and see how that goes along, because I'm not sure about the process in terms of how many meetings a year, when it's convened, by whom. So you know, if you give me a general idea of who wants to be involved, I can feed that back.
Well, I think we could certainly generate 3 or 4 members of this committee who would be prepared to sit in or be a member of that subgroup.
Was that yourself, Chairman, Councillor Corp and Councillor Ward-Booth?
Well, maybe, but I think Councillor Corp had a good point. There are some individuals who aren't here this evening who might want to be involved, maybe. So I think we could certainly raise 4 people who would like to be involved, I'm sure, and we can organise the exact details of that maybe after the meeting.
So okay, I'll talk to the Democratic Services Manager when she returns from leave and discuss how I'm going to approach the rest of the committee to gain a level of interest.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, and then in terms of the items to be considered at the September meeting, so we've got a code of conduct review, and then the external audit fees will come back to that meeting, won't there? And then the SIAS and the SAFS updates, the work programme, plus the items that we've just discussed.
Yeah. The retention scheme and fraud policies.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, members, are we happy that? So we go back to the recommendations, which are on page
281.
281. Sorry, thank you.
Mark,
we've got 2 recommendations.
Have we got the 106 on the September meeting?
Yes.
Right.
That will be on subject to anything we heard differently from.
Can we just be careful about the section 106 particular issue, because it was reported last year and you've heard the internal auditors say that everything is, for want of a better phrase, hunky-dory in that regard. So again, not to step on the toes of ONS committee from a performance viewpoint, can we be specific on what we're looking for in relation to section 106 agreement monies from the remit of A&G?
From our point of view, it's the process. So if we get the report for the meeting, then that could be looked at, couldn't it?
I think, Chairman, Jackie Bruce has been appointed as the Section 106 officer, and I believe there's discussions going on about some sort of process that's going to be implemented to let local groups bid for funding and things like that. So perhaps it would be useful to have it doesn't have to be a particularly long written report, but just a report outlining the new process, how's it changed, etc., from a governance point of view.
Yeah.
And from an audit point of view, do we just want to be assured that the funds that are due to be paid over by developers are actually being received by the council? I mean, because that was I know we were different.
More importantly, are the council spending the amounts that are time limited
within the time frame? Exactly, yes. Which is what we focused on this time last year. Although we were a different beast then, but I still think that from an audit point of view, that's something we should look at.
Yeah,
I think there are two strands to this. There's the process, which I think Councillor Stowe and Councillor Wall-Booth very, very eloquently discussed just now. But there's an audit perspective to it too.
Yeah. Okay. I'll pass it on. Okay,
thank you. So we've got the two recommendations then, which is the recommendations A and B. The main agenda items next meeting to be agreed, and the draft work programme as amended at Appendix A be agreed. Do we have a proposer for that? Councillor Court and Councillor Wall-Booth. Proposer seconder. Thank you. All those in favour? Smashing. I think we're done.
Yep.
20 to 10. Oh well, no, nearly. It wasn't 10 o'clock. Okay, everybody, thanks so much for your attendance tonight. Thank you. I think it was we got through quite a lot of business, and I think it was a good meeting. And officers, thank you very much indeed for your time and your work for this meeting too. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thanks very much indeed for your too. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.